So when we start talking about hounds and the way we tell our story about hounds, the public doesn't need to know everything. I use this analogy a lot. I like posting pictures of my kids on Facebook, pictures of my family and all that stuff. And I'm very proud of my kids, but I didn't take the video camera into the bedroom and show you how they were made. There's just some things that as individuals, we have to have a level of decency and be able to tell our story without showing everything.
That's exactly. I think, educating our ranks is really important on that. That's something I know more and more people have tried to do I've really seen it over the last 10 years. If you can look at something and say, you know what, this is going to be very controversial or somebody's going to really not like this, then it's probably best you don't even put it up on social media.
This is the Houndsman XP Podcast.
Good dog, get that bear. Get that bear
The
in here.
original podcast for the complete houndsman.
Look at your coat of go, Justin Hyde. We're gonna get him. We're gonna get him.
The podcast that represents our lifestyle of extreme performance.
Get up there. Get him. Get him. Yeah, good boy, Ranger.
Uniting houndsmen across the globe from east to west, north to south.
If you're going to catch a cat or a lion, you have to have teamwork.
We take you to the wildest places on earth.
Yeah, so how many days a week can you spend out there?
As much as I can, to be honest with you. Anytime that I get, I'm out there.
Join us for every heart-pounding adventure on Houndsman XP.
I'll tell you like I tell everyone else, I'm going to hunt whether you're here or not, so you might as well be here.
Welcome to the new and hopefully improved Houndsman XP Podcast on the Xtreme Performance Outdoor Network. If you're listening to my voice, congratulations, you found us. We're glad that you're here. And if you have friends that are asking you how they have lost the Houndsman XP Podcast, make sure you chime in. Help us out on social media. Share our podcast. Share this. Show people how to subscribe to this new link. And it's real simple. Open up your podcast player, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcast, Audacity, wherever you're listening to this podcast or wherever you normally listen to a podcast, and just treat it like a search engine, like Google. Right at the top, there's a search bar, and when you type in Xtreme Performance Outdoor Network, then all the shows are going to pop up. So this is the first full week that we will only be airing on this feed. You can search for The Journey. You can search for All Mixed Up. You can search for The Dogmen. You can just subscribe to the Houndsman XP Podcast. More listening options for you, the listener. If you're one of those crazy guys that incorporates falcons into your dog game, we've got a great podcast for you. Falconry Chronicles. Jonathan Munier will break down falconry every week with some of the most accomplished falconers in the world. So that's an added bonus. We're also going to be adding some more shows coming up very soon, and I think you guys are going to like it. We're also going to become dealers for a couple of the products that we push, the things that we believe in. The first is Elite Nutrition. For the last month, I've been adding Essential Dog to my dog feed, and the results have been amazing. And even though I've been hunting them, I've still had to loosen some collars, things like that. the ability of the dogs to get full benefits from the feed that you're feeding them when you're using Essential Dog is absolutely amazing. I'm a skeptic. I've never been a big supplement guy. I can't even remember to take my own vitamins in the morning and my fish oil and blah, 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 all that stuff. So it's very hard for me to remember to, add supplements to dog food. But the Essential Dog alone, and that's the only product I'm going to tell you about. We're going to have them all. But the Essential Dog is so easy to use. It's 1 scoop to 10 pounds of dog feed. Mix it with a drywall mixer, a mud mixer. I put it on a drill and just, mix it all in there good. It's going to absorb right into the natural oils with the feed. You're not even going to see it in the bucket. And you got to give the dog's system a little bit of time to adjust to it, but the things that are in that stuff are amazing. Essential vitamins and minerals and diatomaceous earth. Body condition's great. Coats are shiny. Stools are reduced. I'm not cleaning up as much mess after the hounds. And I'm not feeding as much feed, and that's no joke. I really am not. We're also going to become Cajun Light dealers. So we're going to have all the Cajun Lights on our website at houndsmenxp.com in our store. We're also going to handle a product that I've grown very fond of. It's not Essential Dog, but it's close. It tastes a lot better, I'm sure. And that is the Big M's Breader. Man, that stuff is magic for seafood and chicken. I'm big on eating. I'm big on cooking good food. And so I want to have Cajun Lights and Nixon's Big M's Breader. What a combination. L.W. Nixon also has a big fish market that he's come up with all the goodies to go along with some great fish too. So I'm excited, guys. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you found us on Xtreme Performance Outdoor Network. If you're having some trouble finding it or you know people that are, it's spelled with an X. It's a XP Outdoor Network, Xtreme Performance. And we're going to be living up to that name with all the shows and all the things that we're going to do over here. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get to this podcast. We're going to talk to Jason Wisniewski of Fur Takers of America. We're going to talk about trapping, coexisting with trappers, what the future holds for houndsmen and trappers alike, because we kind of share a lot of the same challenges. We're just going to keep building those bridges and bridging those gaps between these other sporting groups that need us and we need them. We all need to stand together. This is a box shaker. Let's get the tailgate down. It's time to dump the box. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Houndsman XP Podcast. And this episode is something that's very near and dear to me. I grew up with this organization, read about Fur Takers of America in Fur Fishing Games since I was old enough to read. It was always a magazine that was around. Cut my teeth trapping along the creeks and ditches of South Central Indiana. Consumed a lot of my life. Before I could walk or before I could drive, I was headed out on foot with a pack of traps that I inherited from my great grandfather, and setting traps up and down these ditches and stuff, and trying to figure out ways. I mean, I looked at everything. I looked at, building my own traps, the box traps. I tried everything. I was marginally successful, but I'm honored to have Jason Wisniewski, president of Fur Takers of America, on the podcast with us today to talk about FTA and where you guys are at and what trapping looks like in the 21st century. So welcome, Jason. I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. And I think we got lots of great stuff to discuss, and we should have a interesting time here today.
Yeah, it's just, what's your background? Tell us a little bit about your background, how you got involved in trapping, and talk about what you do for a living, because that's a big draw too.
Okay, so I actually kind of got into trapping a little later than a lot of folks. I grew up in Southwest Pennsylvania, where trapping's huge in Pennsylvania. I mean, they still have probably over 10,000 fur takers in the state, and it's one of those places. It's one of our big strongholds across the country. But I always wanted to, but my dad really didn't know anything about it. I didn't really
Right.
have any traps, any equipment, but I would go out and run a line with one of my best friends who lived right down the road, and we'd go out and run his beaver and mink line, and that kind of was the early experience I had. And then that was probably through middle school and high school, and then whenever I went to college, my roommate, who was one of my best friends from high school, who we wrestled together, hunted together, fished together, everything, he started wanting to run a line, so I went out with him, and that really was the bug that bit me, and I said I need to get some of my own traps. So I found some at the local classifieds, and bought them from a guy who was selling them out, and it went from there. And I got involved with the actually my first experience with the trapping organization with the Pennsylvania Trappers Association District 5, who hosted a weekend trapper training course, and I went to that. That was just absolutely critical for me to really learn the correct way to trap without learning the bad habits that a lot of folks have, and poor bedding and all the other things that makes that learning curve a little steeper. So they cut off a lot of that learning curve. I got involved with going to their meetings all the time, really saw the value of membership. And of course, moved off not long after that to Tennessee and went to graduate school at Tennessee Tech. And I went to college for biology, and went to graduate school for fisheries biology. And started working with freshwater mussels in graduate school, which was something I really didn't know much about. And, it was one of the things I learned early on, that they're probably one of the most endangered group of animals in the world. And, I left Tennessee and moved to Georgia, where I worked for the Georgia Department of Natural Resources for 15 years as their mussel biologist. And then 2018, my wife and I moved to Tennessee, and, she's also pretty well known in the wildlife realm. She's a marketing person and big into the R3 efforts. So she worked for Georgia DNR for several years, and then took those talents to Tennessee, and we both worked up there for the last few years. And actually, she's just she got a great offer from the National Deer Association and has just become their chief marketing officer. And we moved our family farm in Alabama. So we've been here about 6 months now, and something we always wanted to retire to, but never thought we'd do that so early. But just the right opportunity came along, and God graced us with that blessing. So we took advantage, which is nice, close to family. And
this outdoor community is so small. I mean, we just had Nick on, the president and CEO of the NDA, on the podcast earlier this fall, or last fall, I guess. And that's what we're all about, man. We have got to find ways to bridge these gaps in this outdoor community if we're going to stand up and continue to resist the efforts of the anti-hunting community. And that's why I'm naming this podcast Save the Planet, Wear More Fur, because I just some of my earliest memories of trapping and being in the outdoors involved trapping. Before I had hounds, I was trying to trap. I would crawl under the corn crib and dig out dry dirt in the winter to bed traps in and stuff, because in South Central Indiana, we get a lot of rain and moisture, and traps freeze. And I'd go to check a trap, and the dog would be flipped and the trap jaws would be wide open. And I'd go back and I'd read and I'd look and read articles and fur fishing game, and guys are digging. I made coon bait. I stunk up the well house one time. I went down to the creek and caught a bunch of creek chubs and ran them through my mom's blender, which got me in trouble, and put them in a pickle jar and set them in the window of the pump house until it was so nasty you couldn't even hardly stand it. And I mean, I was into it. So I'm real excited to hear about your experiences trapping and share some of my own. What are some of your early experiences? I mean, trapping.
Oh, I can remember going out and setting my first traps, and I think it was within about 2 days I caught my first critter. It was a gray fox in a spot there not too far behind the house place I grew up hunting in, and right on the edge of some state game lands. And I can still remember it to this day, exactly what it was like walking up to it, where it was. I could take you to that exact spot to this day. And so that, going out and, all the first animals you get, I always heard how tough red fox were to catch whenever I was growing up, when I was younger. And everybody said, oh, you can't leave any scent. And, my friend, whenever we were out on his line, he's like, now you can't even spit out here, in this, it's a 40-acre field. And so it really said, well, these things are hard to catch. And then I started having a lot of success catching red fox because we still had a good population in Pennsylvania. And that was so much fun. They're probably my favorite animal whatsoever. I just love the smell of red fox. There's just nothing like it. If they could bottle that and make it a perfume,
you wouldn't be very popular at like church and stuff if you started wearing red fox scent. I can tell you that.
I guess not, but it's one of those things that I don't know. I guess to each their own. But yeah, the smell of a fox is just something that it is amazing to me. And
it's amazing how we talk about scent a lot on this podcast, being a Houndsman podcast, and how scent works and different things. But there's such an emotional tie. The way our brains work, it smells. Certain odors can transport us back to grandma's kitchen or the fur shed, and there's such a powerful marker in our brains and who we are. I'm the same way with hounds. I don't know how many people that have, they walk up to a hound and they're like, man, that dog stinks. And it's like, man, that smells like a hound. That's what it's about. The dog box smell, all of that. So I can relate.
Yeah, it is really, between the fox and I can remember when I first started trapping coyotes here, it really wasn't until I moved south. In Pennsylvania, they didn't have many. I think in all my years of hunting and fishing and just being outdoors, I'd only ever seen 2 coyotes in all of Pennsylvania.
No kidding.
And I haven't hunted up there in the last 5 or 6 years, but that was going back to, I would take, as I was working and got into that, had more money, was able to have more comp time. I'd work like crazy all summer long so I could use all my comp time to go hunting in the winter. And I would go up to my dad's house and stay with him for usually the week before Thanksgiving. Their bear season would start, so we'd go up and bear hunt, and then I'd go into their deer season, and then I'd stick around till right after New Year's and spend a lot of time out there. And all that time, I'd only ever seen 2 coyotes, and and that's one of the reasons they still have good numbers of red fox. Because they don't have the high numbers of coyotes like we do here in Alabama, where I'm at, Northeast Alabama. I've started catching red fox in the last 3 years, and that's after a number of years of trapping here, not even seeing any sign of one.
Right.
And what I've really noticed is our coyote population's way down. Whenever I first started trapping on the farm, I'd go and I'd only get a few days to trap. I'd catch 10 or 15 coyotes. And of course we were, living in Tennessee at that time in Georgia. So it wasn't something I could go out every day. And the impacts they have on all wildlife, people think, largely the deer or largely turkeys, stuff like that. But, there's other species that they affect, and the red fox is one of them. And there's actually an interesting study. It was done back in 2012 where they were investigating the upsurge of Lyme disease in the southeastern U.S. And a lot of the conventional wisdom, I guess, or conventional thoughts was that the increase in the number of cases of Lyme disease or tick-borne illnesses was because there was more deer on the landscape and the ticks were getting on the deer and so on and so forth. And they done a lot of modeling on populations, and what they found was that it was actually more likely that the coyotes were suppressing the red fox, which are the primary predators of the mice that carry the Lyme disease bacteria. And as the red fox were more abundant, they would eat more of these mice, so they would have less chance of passing that bacteria on to the ticks. And, and that's just one way, of really knowing the connection between the importance of managing all wildlife, not just our game species, but all of our fur bearers, all of our, the coyotes and the beavers, which are often classified as nuisance species. Really every one of those, especially in the Southeast. I mean, prior to about 30 years ago, we didn't have many coyotes.
Right.
Everything was red fox. And I imagine that's pretty true of the whole eastern U.S., where the coyotes have really just boomed. But, here on our farm, it was something I would catch, all those coyotes. And then I've really got strategic whenever I trap. And I just actually started setting out my line yesterday, mainly trying to break up this breeding cycle with the male and the female coyotes, because, they have a short period. It's only about a month. And my theory I came to is if I could break those breeding pairs up, at least, take them off the landscape during the breeding cycle, then they wouldn't be having pups to feed all summer long, which would be requiring, they would have to go and harvest more deer and turkeys and whatever game species. And I don't know if there's anything to it, but just on what I've seen, my red fox population's up. Our deer population's just booming. Turkeys are going way up as well. So, it's all connected, and it's really something that I know there's a lot of different groups out there saying, well, if you catch a coyote, you're just creating more. And we all know that as soon as you take one off, there's transients that are moving in. They're just they're just kind of animals that do that. But, if you can, and they're always going to be there. So we're not going to ever make the coyote go extinct. But what we can do is manage those ones that are going to be most problematic because they have to feed young.
Yeah.
So
there's a lot of, I think this is a good opportunity to talk about the science and how valuable science is, because that's basically, I mean, there's a lot of reasons to talk about this, and science is one of those things that there's such a mistrust in our culture across the United States about the word science. That word has been weaponized politically the last 3 years to the point that a lot of people are very distrustful of anything science-based. But if we don't talk about science and we don't talk about the value of science and wildlife management, then that's exactly what we're up against in Colorado right now with the mountain lion bobcat ban that they're pushing out there. There's no science-based that on our proponents' side that's pushing this agenda, and there's a lot of science on our side to show why predator management, why this is valuable to a sustainable population, all of those sort of things. So we can't turn our back on science because of political weaponization of science towards something that's totally unrelated to wildlife management. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And that's what, we see in all these different bills or initiatives that people have. They try to use science. And one thing that I found as a researcher I've published a fair number of papers in scientific literature and all across the board, with freshwater mussel sampling designs. And
I want to say something real quick about freshwater mussels. So the Wabash River in Indiana was like a major source of freshwater mussels, and mussling on the Wabash was still in effect when I got hired as a conservation officer back in 1990. We actually went out on the river and would go up and down the river and regulate freshwater mussel harvest in the state of Indiana. There are places along the Wabash River where there's still in the embankment, you can still find huge piles of mussel shells from the places that process mussel shell, where they would cut buttons and different things, and you can still find those remnants. I've actually got a set of brails from a braille bar that I have in my living room, and people look at it and they have no clue what that is. I'll have to post a picture of that. They're interesting.
it looks like a torture device more than something people use the muscles. Yeah, and the Wabash. There's actually a species that was probably described from there. I'm not sure where it was described, but the Wabash pigtoe.
Yep, pigtoe.
Actually, the Fuscinae flava. So that's one that we dealt with a little bit in Tennessee, and it's actually expanding its range in a lot of those places. So.
Yeah. It was a total sidetrack. I just the muscle thing is, I just totally sidetracked our conversation here with that little bit of information for sure. But
yeah, it's funny that being the president of the Fur Takers, and being a, avid hunter and trapper and everything outdoors. A lot of times I run into folks and tell them, oh yeah, I'm, president of the FTA, or I love to trap. And then they're like, well, you're an endangered species biologist. How do those two things fit together? And I was actually our former director of the Georgia Wildlife Resources Division when I was there, Dan Forster, who's very well known in the wildlife realms across the country. He's past president of AFWA. Just I think he's with the Archery Trade Association now. Just awesome guy, good friend of the family. But he said to my wife,
small world. I know.
Yes,
I know Dan as well. So
okay, so Dan said to my wife the one day, said, your husband's an interesting guy. He's kind of like mixing a fine wine with Fruit Loops. And it was just a great analogy. It's like, you know what? But the reason I can do that is because I understand the connection between it all. And, real world example. Last year, I'd gone out onto the Duck River in Middle Tennessee, which is one of the probably the most diverse rivers in all of North America. More fish and mussel species than anywhere else. I think just in that river alone.
That's a bold statement.
It is, but it's been scientifically shown. There's about 75 freshwater mussel species historically known from the duck. I could still go to some places today and find upwards of 40 species. And, we were there at the one site and there were just shells laying everywhere, fresh dead shells. And it was there was an old pickup truck tire out in the water. And, we probably picked up 150 or so shells just from that pickup truck. And to most people, they'd think, okay, that's just, a bunch of dead shells there. But to anybody that knows, that was a muskrat midden. So those muskrats feed heavily on freshwater mussels in that river. And they'll take them all and they'll eat them all and just leave the shells there. And they have feed stations, like that tire was a great feed station. Well, I went and took all those animals, laid them out, cleaned them up. They're great for museum specimens. And I was getting ready to put together a presentation for the National Assembly of Sportsmen's Caucus's meeting that was out in Bozeman, Montana last year. And trying to put that connection of how important wildlife management or trapping was as a wildlife management tool. And the American Fisheries Society publishes a paper on the investigation and value of fish and mussel kills. And, so they have values for all these species. And I went and added up all the values of those animals that were in that feed station. And it came out to about $58,000 worth of freshwater mussels, including a number of federally endangered species. So, that was probably just a handful of muskrats that were doing that. But, as one of the most endangered group of animals in the world, losing some of them, especially some of the rarer ones, can really have some adverse effects on the population, even cause it go extinct. And that wouldn't have been a problem before man came and started, recreating everything and changing the environment. But unfortunately, we have to, manage wildlife in the world we're in, not the one we wish we were in. And
that's a good statement right there. I like that.
But yeah, those muskrats, they need management too. And that's one of the fur bearers that many trappers start out on, and where there's decent muskrat populations, people still have a lot of fun trapping muskrats, and that's what a lot of kids start out on, which is a lot of fun.
I'm writing down that quote. We need to manage the world we are in, not the one we wish we were in. Is that what you said?
That sounds right.
That's a good statement. So bear with me. I'm taking notes, people, because that was an important statement right there. powerful. Yeah. So let's talk about you. I think you every time you start talking, my mind starts racing 1,000 different directions on things we could talk about. And, when you start talking about the manipulated and altered world that we live in along the Duck River, I don't know a thing about the Duck River, but when you start thinking about all the pressures that are putting on, that we as humans are putting on the resource, and then to remove management tools from the toolbox of wildlife managers, that's hurtful for sustainable wildlife into the future. And how heavily trapped is the Duck River in Tennessee now?
I suspect it's not very heavily trapped. I had planned on trying to go out there in a couple strategic locations and trying to take out some of the muskrats. And, what we were having is some of the animals we were releasing, they were spending a lot of money propagating them. And, a lot of this stuff's done on a regional scale as well. So it's not just the state of Tennessee doing it, but we were working in cooperation with the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife,
right,
Fish and Wildlife Service, all this, and there's recovery dollars going towards a lot of this. And, I planned on trying to get out there
is that all money that could have been, that we could have avoided spending from the government if we have more trappers in there helping manage the resource? Is that what you're saying?
It could certainly help. The thing that I always like to come back to on, especially fur trappers, people that are going out there and buying a license, your recreational trappers, which I hesitate to use that term because none of us are recreational trappers. We're all using a wildlife conservation tool that is regulated under the wildlife agencies as a tool to control these critters that wouldn't be controlled otherwise.
Right.
You're not going to be harvesting the muskrats or anything else, without trapping. So
there's some there are some terrier guys that I know that are pretty aggressive on muskrat dens and things like that we've talked to in the past. So, but it's still not as effective as, if I go out with a terrier and dig a couple dens with a terrier, which is legal in some places to do, I still am not going to have the same impact as floating through a marsh and checking traps, the time I get done digging through reeds to dig a terrier, I'm a couple dens, I'm done. Whereas if I'm trapping, then I can really get out there and make an impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's, that's the thing we always say is they work 24/7. You set them and come back the next day, you take whatever out, especially with a lot of the water trapping. I mean, the tools that we use are just so simple to use and so quick to set up that you can really be really effective at taking those animals out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But
go ahead. Oh,
I was going to say, but these trappers though, like I guess quote unquote recreational trappers will say, they're providing this service to society for no cost. In fact, they're buying a license to provide that service. And, and there's alternatives. And this was something that we had considered up on the Clinch River, which is probably the second most diverse river in North America. It might be right there with the Duck River. It's a ton of fish and mussels endemic to it. But we were having a lot of issues with the muskrat predation there. And I was asked by folks from the Nature Conservancy and the Fish and Wildlife Service if, we would consider hiring a trapper to go in there and take out some of those muskrats because they were having such an effect on the listed mussels up there. And, and I brought the realization, I said, the muskrats are there because the food source is there. You have dense mussel populations. And when I used to go there back in the early 2000s, when I was in graduate school, we still found tens of thousands of shells that the muskrats were eating. And, it's been like that ever since. And I do know there's a few trappers in that area that probably trap on the property or in that area. But, by and large, compared to what we were 30, 40 years ago, there's not near as many trappers out there providing those services. And
right.
What that's caused is a boom in all these species because they've, had no pressure and have been able to reproduce and overpopulate. And what we're seeing, certainly with raccoons even across the country, Right now, some of the estimates from the fur bear biologists around the country say that raccoon populations are now higher than what they were when Europeans colonized the United States or the New World here. So what that's brought with it is record cases of canine distemper, in which, here's another one of those things most people don't realize, but that's getting passed on to other species like your gray fox, like your spotted skunks very well could be that could be one of the major reasons why spotted skunk populations are crashing all through the East. But we have seen, the same thing with the gray fox. I know Indiana's been one of the states that have had a lot of declines in the gray fox population.
I haven't seen a gray fox in years. We're seeing more red fox. We're seeing more coyotes. We got coons everywhere. Plenty of possums. But, Jason, I think that's one of the things that if you really start to think about what wildlife management is hunters and sportsmen, and I want to go back real quick to the recreation part of it. That's where I think that houndsmen and trappers are a lot alike. It's a lifestyle for us. We work on equipment, we scout, we do all these things. With hounds, you're taking care of them 24/7. So it's not, even when I publish this podcast, I've got to select the segments where it goes in Apple and Spotify and all that stuff. And I've got to put it in recreation. And it's not recreation. It's who I am. It defines who I am. It's a lifestyle. And so it's much more than taking, being involved in the church softball league. It's so much more than that. But getting back to the wildlife management side, it's so intricate, and we get tunnel vision on what we're interested in. You brought up raccoons. Well, as a houndsman, I grew up coon hunting. And so it's easy for me to sit back and say, when I see a pile of fur taken by a trapper, for me to say, oh, they're killing all my coons that I get to tree with my dog, and they're really hurting the population. But what you're saying is that our raccoon population on a national scale is, what'd you say? It rivals the colonial settlement days or higher?
Yes. Yeah. Right now, at the, one of the groups that the Fur Bear or the Fur Takers of America are involved with is the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Fur Bear Technical Working Group. And we were at the meeting last year they had, and, they brought that up. They said, through a lot of the eastern states, specifically the raccoon population is probably as high or higher than what it was at European colonization. So that's saying something, because you always hear the argument that, well, we've destroyed all the habitat and we've done this. And, in fact, we all know, being outdoorsmen, knowing the movements and the habits of animals, that, a lot of times the only places red fox can survive anymore is residential areas. And,
right.
Everybody says, well, we're building more subdivisions, so we're destroying all their habitat. They have nowhere else to go. It's like, no, we're actually creating better habitat for them, because they can occur in higher densities, can co-occur with the coyotes. The raccoons are very opportunistic. So, how many times have you, of course, you hear people all the time that, oh, I've had 7 raccoons on my back porch eating cat food.
The Houndsman XP Podcast is fueled by Joy Dog Food. Joy Dog Food has a rich tradition of supporting the Houndsmen of America. Founded in 1945, Joy is proud of its history and the relationship it has built with the American Houndsman. And in 76 years, there's never been a recall. Made with 100% American-made high-quality ingredients, Joy Dog Food has one of the highest calorie-dense formulas on the market. For 76 years, this made-in-America product has kept hunting dogs in the field day after day, season after season. And when we say made in America, Joy has a long track record of fighting for American freedoms by being on the front lines against the animal rights movement and their extremist tactics. Joy will fuel your hounds and fight for your freedoms. Fueled by Joy. You know what app I use on my phone more than any other app besides the podcast app to listen to this here podcast? I use Onyx. Onyx Maps is the most comprehensive mapping system for hunters on the market today. I use it all the time. When I was in New Mexico, I was looking at 40,000 acres of ranch that I needed to learn. I flip open Onyx and just start studying the map. When I'm riding trails, I put the tracking app on. It helps me get around in strange country. I could mark water sources, food sources, bear sign, just all kinds of options within Onyx. You need to check out Onyx Maps by going to houndsmenxp.com. Click on the link on our sponsor page. You'll go right to Onyx Maps, and when you check out, enter the code HXP20 and you will get 20% off of your order. Know where you stand with Onyx. Right. I used to answer a lot of those calls. You get the little old lady, she calls you and she's like, I've got raccoons on my porch every night eating my cat food and you need to come and get them. And it's a real simple answer. It's like, when are you feeding your cats? I feed them right before I go to bed. I was like, don't feed them before you go to bed. You know, they're nocturnal by nature. So feed them before you go to work in the morning when the raccoons aren't going to.
And better yet, keep your cat indoor, because cats are
absolutely
awful on wildlife.
And that's why that's why those red foxes, I mean, you talk about subdivisions, think about all the things that subdivisions create for our wildlife. You've got landscape around houses. So they've got cover, they've got hedgerows, they've got no shortage of mice and rodents that are attracted to human. You know, rodents are dependent upon human existence and they'll proliferate. That's why they're hunting rats in New York City with terriers. So you're creating this perfect smorgasbord. Plus the red fox goes to town and he's like, there aren't any coyotes around here. This is pretty free and easy living. And your cat who's running around outside is a good little meal for a red fox.
Yeah. I used to, when we lived in Tennessee, we kind of lived in a suburban area. I guess it was interesting. There was a huge subdivision behind us and farm pastures on the other side. So we lived right on the edge of all the development.
Oh yeah.
I got on my wife told me I need to get on the Nextdoor app, and had it through my email, and you find out what all the locals are doing. You know, sometimes it'd just be pictures, questions, different things. And I would not hesitate to say that each week there'd probably be 3 to 5 people posting on there that either a fox or a coyote got their cat, or their cat went missing. And this is just common stuff, and you try to educate the people on. A lot of them don't like to hear it, but the fact is, it's like, well, leaving your cat outside, leaving the food outside, all that is it's like, it's basically government subsidized feeding of the wildlife, or human subsidized, I guess would be a better way to say. So, it's like you're creating your own problems. And a lot of nuisance control officers, that would be the first thing they tell these people, is that if you want to cut down the cases of these problems, keep your cat indoors and don't feed them outside, and don't feed your pets outside. That's something I tell people all the time. That's the very first step you can do to the abating issues.
Right.
You do that, and you don't have an issue whatsoever.
It's just like cats get a free pass. If my dog's running around the neighborhood, the neighbors are up in arms about it. But if my cat's out running around the neighborhood, or, the lady's dude's cat down the road's running around the neighborhood, it's like, oh, that's so-and-so's cat. They just get a free pass. And the whole time they're out there, I mean, I've always said it. I wish we could figure out a way that we could breed a strain of dogs that's got the instincts of a house cat. You leave them outside, they absolutely are hunters. They've got all those embedded genetic markers from centuries ago, and they don't lose it. I mean, you dump a cat out in the middle of nowhere and a cat's going to survive. You do that with a dog, they're not going to make it.
Yeah, they're looking for their way back home, and or somebody that's going to feed them. We have a lot of stray dogs on our farm here that people drop off. We're kind of out away from everything, and people drop them off all the time. And we've had, even the dogs, another thing that people don't realize, but the effect they've had on our cattle at the farm this year. I think they've killed between just a pack, 1 or 2 packs of pit bulls that were running around. They killed around 5 or 6 heifers and a bunch of calves. And that's something that rural living you have to deal with all the time. And and it's one thing to say, okay, a coyote has to do that to live. We understand that, but these dogs don't have to. That's just unfortunately poor ownership of these dogs. And and I love dogs. I mean, everybody I think does. I don't want to see anything bad, but it's like, well, I don't know why people have to not take responsibility for their animals. But that's interesting. We kind of talk about that because one of the big losses to trapping we've had the last couple of years was out in New Mexico. Senate Bill 32, which outlawed all forms of trapping on public land. And it was, as we said, a lot of the arguments of the anti-crowd.
New Mexico's got a lot of public land, a lot. Aren't they the second?
It's probably either the first or second. Yeah, they have like over 22 million acres of public land. So that's huge, and that's what that's essentially created is a source for all these animals to be protected on, go out and populate the areas that are on private land, the ranches and everything else, and cause problems. But, it was an emotional argument that they made. It was all, the emotional tag that they used on this bill was Roxy's Law. And it was after a dog that got caught in a trap and wasn't found for several days. And, one of the questions that came up to me is, well, if you're supposed to have your dog in control, how do you not know where it is for several days? But one of the things I didn't really come across until it was pretty late in that process, the legislative process, was, New Mexico, one fact that they should be very proud of is among all the cattle and sheep predation in the entire country, they lead the pack. And it's predation from dogs that's the number one predator of the cattle and the sheep in New Mexico. So, so the very thing that they're saying, should be outlawed to protect these dogs. In fact, it's not really a trapping issue. It was a irresponsible dog ownership issue.
Right. And we talk a lot about, just because you're a houndsman, you don't get a free pass here. We promote responsible ownership of your hounds. If you're going to have hounds, feed them the best you can, do all the work. And that's why we invest in Garmin collars and tracking equipment and all that kind of stuff. But you still have a responsibility. It's like shooting a gun. Once I shoot the gun, the bullet's out of the barrel, and I'm responsible for where that bullet goes. And I think the same thing applies to us as houndsmen. Now, to talk about your point about Roxy's Law, I just don't. It was an emotional argument. So how do we get past? How do we overcome that? Because I've had hounds hit on the road, and I don't go out and campaign and try to outlaw vehicles on public roadways. So how do we get past this?
That's a great question, and it's something we do need to figure out. I think a lot of it, in hindsight, knowing how that one worked out, I use at least, it's kind of like you can either look at something as a loss or you can look at it as a learning experience. And, and that was a big loss to trapping, but I think throwing that, argument in there, you're really getting, there's all sorts of research out there on things like that. That's a point that I wish I would have maybe made a little stronger. Of course, that was, I guess several years ago now. I was just a board member of the FTA, but that was something that really just resonated with me. And it was, a lot of it was the lack of science, and the emotional connect. But, I think in a lot of cases we've sat back and, as trapping organizations, one of the things that has probably hurt us most is we always thought if we lay low and avoid controversy and people don't realize we're out there, then they're not going to mess with us. Well, we've seen exactly what happened. They still mess with us. Matter of fact, we've actually played right into their plan because we've almost made ourselves irrelevant because nobody even knows about us.
Man, there are so many parallels right there, because when we started this podcast, I actually got messages that said, we don't want you doing this podcast because we don't want the public knowing we're flying under the radar. We're better if we hide. We're never going to get anywhere trying to appease our opponents or trying to hide from them. You can't hide anymore. And we did the exact same thing as Houndsmen. We tried to fly under the radar, not talk about, and we lost control of the narrative, because when you're not telling your story in the way that it needs to be told, somebody else is more than happy to pick that up and develop the narrative for you and use it against you. And that's what we've seen on all hunting. And that's why I think we need to get the story out there about FTA and all these different groups that are out there working hard to make sure that they're telling their own story from a factual base point and are responsible and not letting the emotions get carried away in the whole conversation. Yeah.
And, an analogy or an example I always like to use, and it's, it might be somewhat controversial, I don't know, but, we look at gay marriage, and it's been something that, a lot of people don't like. I personally, I want people to let me live my life, so I don't care if they want to live their life. However, it's not really the argument, but 20 years ago, you didn't talk about it. You never heard about it. You just hear rumors here and there, but nowadays it's crammed down our throats. And the way that they did that was they made themselves relevant by not being afraid to talk about it. And that's exactly what we need to do. We don't need to be afraid of showing an animal caught in a trap, or, a treed coon, or, our deer we harvested. We need to actually take pride in that and say, we're doing this, and then tell the story of, hey, because I, took this deer out of the population, that leaves more space for fawns to grow up, or that, helps me control my population. Actually tell the story behind why that's so important. And that's where we need to go with a lot of it.
Okay. So as taking that stance, what are the limits for telling our story? Because social media has been, we've actually had stuff posted on social media that is cherry picked by the anti-hunting crowd. We're out there trying to tell our story, showing who we are and what we do. And then it gets cherry picked, taken out of context, manipulated to push an agenda. So in your opinion, where are the limits on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's kind of one of those things I really looked at, and I was kind of getting at this in some of the scientific research. Even when I read and review a lot of these papers, it's amazing how much, people will cherry pick what points they want to make to support their argument, but they totally leave out but this is the alternative to that, or, the counter to that doesn't give them any support in their arguments. And especially in today's society where we, you can cherry pick whatever. We've seen it with political campaigns for years, where they go, somebody makes some statement and they take this little 3-second blurb that they say and use it out of context. And, I don't think we can ever stop that. The big thing is, we have all these emotional arguments that a lot of those folks make, and we know we're never going to change their minds.
Right.
No matter what we do, but there's still a large percentage of the voting public that will listen to the truth. And, it was interesting. We had a case, I think it was in Tennessee last year. The state agency, Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, was promoting a trapper training course over in East Tennessee, and it got to be pretty controversial. They did it on Facebook. A lot of people saying trapping's barbaric, all this. Well, it is one of those things, you're going to have those haters out there. But the strength of that is you have a lot of other people, especially whenever those kind of posts are getting a lot of momentum and a lot of people commenting and liking. There's a lot more people paying attention.
Yeah.
And it's a great opportunity to educate through there. You actually give people the facts. There's a lot of people out there that don't have common sense, but there's a lot that do. And whenever the story is a little too too hard to believe, then they know that, okay, somebody's lying here. And I think by presenting the facts in those situations, that's how you educate the people that are on the fence, that are the real ones making the decisions when it comes to the voting and everything, and their stances. Because, we know that I always kind of use the thing with national politics. So 45% of people are going to vote a particular way no matter what. It doesn't matter how bad their candidate is. 45% are going to vote for the other one, and then you have that 10% in between that's going to be the ones that actually make the decision on who gets elected. And it's really targeting that 10% that we need to focus on, or 20%, however much it is. Those are just hypothetical numbers, but yeah, it's just,
I had the opportunity to meet a guy out in Denver when I was out there a couple weeks ago. It's Will Marquardt from he's the owner of Davis Tent. He made a statement that just impacted me and started to not change the way I think, but actually, look at how we're doing things. And I even wrote his quote down. It said, Will says, "We're not fighting against something as much as we're fighting for the hearts and minds that don't oppose us, but may vote against us." They're not opposed to what we do, but they may vote against us. I thought when he said it, man, it hooked me. I was like, that's it. So when I asked you the question of what are the limits, I've said this before on this podcast, we don't have to post everything on social media. We should think about the things that are going to cause people to vote against what we do. And that's going to be very apparent in Colorado this year. So I think we have a responsibility, as much as feeding our dog and maintaining our vehicles. We have to guard ourselves against easy predation by these people. And when we start posting things that are what we consider as part of the hunt, there are things that happen on the trap line that the vast majority of the public are going to think is cruel. The fact that you set a trap in a drowning set and a muskrat drowns. Most people can't wrap their head around that and see the value in that side of wildlife management or that part of trapping, because they don't understand it. So when we start talking about hounds and the way we tell our story about hounds, the public doesn't need to know everything. I use this analogy a lot. I like posting pictures of my kids on Facebook, pictures of my family and all that stuff. And I'm very proud of my kids, but I didn't take the video camera into the bedroom and show you how they were made. Yeah. There's just some things that as individuals, we have to have a level of decency and be able to tell our story without showing everything.
That's exactly. I think, educating our ranks is really important on that. And that's something I know more and more people have tried to do I've really seen it over the last 10 years. It's, if you can look at something and say, this is going to be very controversial, or somebody's going to really not like this, then it's probably best you don't even put it up on social media or do any of that. And I remember a few years ago, my wife whenever she was working in Georgia, she had, I think they had some sort of incentive they were trying to do with trapping coyotes. That was whenever, all the research was out there saying that coyotes were having an effect on fawn recruitment. And so they had a thing where you could enter your picture in for a drawing and I think turn your coyote in or something, and then have a chance to win a lifetime license. And so she used the picture of one of the coyotes that I had trapped and put it up there on the agency website. And, and right away it was like, even among our ranks, and this was just, a coyote standing there, you could barely even see the trap. Most people might not even realize it was in a trap, but right away everybody's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you posted that picture. And it's like, it is what it is. It's not like, it wasn't a distasteful picture other than a coyote being caught in a trap. But, what's interesting is they also did the tri-state coyote study down there in Alabama and Georgia and South Carolina. And this is something I always try to get through to everybody, is the same traps they were using to capture these animals, put radio collars or GPS collars on them to track their movements, are the exact same tools that all of us are using out there each and every day on our lines. And in fact, the people they actually hired to catch the animals were friends of mine that are trappers, part of the Georgia Trappers Association or whatever. So it's like, yeah, how can these tools be terrible for this, but they're totally fine with that? And
same thing goes for, what's going on with hounds and the attack on using hounds. The reason we have mountain lion studies and bobcat studies is because there are hundreds of houndsmen out there with trained packs of dogs that can get scientists to the area, collar the lion, collect DNA, collect blood samples, do scat analysis, do all that stuff that they need to do, not only to show the health and viability of the cat population, but what are they feeding on? What's the mule deer population like? Are they, all these different things that come together, but there's a huge disconnect there. And I don't know where it's at. Why doesn't my aunt understand that you setting that trap is beneficial for the wildlife species? Me catching, or one of my friends catching a lion in a tree and studying that species is good for the sustainability of mountain lions. There isn't anybody that cares more about wildlife than me and you, but somehow we're not connecting those dots with these people that Will talks about. They don't oppose us, but they may vote against us. Where are we hitting the disconnect? Why aren't we hitting that? Why aren't we connecting those dots?
That's a great question too, and that's something I was at the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies meeting this past fall in Calgary, and they had just put out the latest survey of hunting, fishing, and outdoor related activities. It's put out every 5 years. The Fish and Wildlife Service funds it, and AFWA, and they go and do that. And what they found is actually there was about a 4% decrease in public support for hunting. And this is the first year they really saw that, and it was across the board. It was pretty much all states were seeing it. And, and there was a lot of discussion on, okay, what exactly is going on here? What's the disconnect? And, I think that's something that all the agencies are going to be looking at going forward here now, because that's pretty alarming. It's there's always been like some sort of trend line, but it's a very distinct divergence of that line compared to what it's been in the past. And it really is. It comes down to, go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you there at all, Jason.
No, you're good.
I spend a lot of time thinking about this. Obviously, I do a podcast that focuses on these issues. And so, and those nights when I wake up or when I'm driving down the road, I think a lot about this. I think we have lost our ability as individuals. Me producing this podcast is not going to impact these people that Will was referring to, because they're not going to listen. They're not going to tune in. The place that it can have an impact is because these people that may vote against us are no dummies. I mean, there are doctors, our lawyers, our educated people, people that are just living their everyday American lives, but they're not informed and they don't understand. And on the surface, without information, it's not a hard sell for them to say, oh yeah, that's not even relevant in today's society. The average person living in the suburbs doesn't even realize that you're setting traps, half a mile from where they sleep at night. And it never affects them. It doesn't. But once they see it, it's like, oh my gosh, I saw a picture of a cat or my dog or a dog caught in a trap. I don't want that anywhere near my home. So these aren't dumb people. But what we've lost our ability to do goes back to what we talked about earlier. I need to be able to talk to my educated relatives at Thanksgiving and talk to them about science-based wildlife management, responsible wildlife management, the deep passion that I have, not for me to be able to go out and kill something, but for the value of this wildlife. If you took wildlife away from me as an individual, it would be devastating to my life. I want to make darn sure it survives. And I think that's where our disconnect is this grassroots individual effort of every trapper, every hunter, every fisherman being able to talk about their values of what we do, how we do it, and why we do it for a future of sustainable wildlife populations.
Yeah, that's absolutely critical. I always say to folks, especially in church, we always talk about, sharing the word and, just reaching out to people. And I always tell them one of the best ways that I've found is, doing something that strikes up a conversation, whether it's, praying it when you're at the restaurant or something, somebody sees that, or just, putting hooks out. It's kind of like fishing, just put things out there, and if they can come to you and start asking questions, or, you can somehow, put that in there. Like I love to wear my FTA sweatshirt and hat and everything everywhere I go. And it's amazing how many conversations that it strikes up just seeing that. And, and here's people that might not know the first thing about it, but just like you said, and like that quote, if at least we're educating these people on it, or even, at these training camps, different stuff, they may never become a trapper, a houndsman, or a hunter, or angler, or anything else. But if they have an understanding of it, they'll never become an anti. And that's what we need to look at. And,
yeah, I used to have an opportunity here where we live. We'd have groups come into here and we'd show them how to fish. And they were all Christian-based groups. Church out of Indianapolis would come down here, and I would take them coon hunting. And years later, I always told people, there isn't a single one of those kids that's ever contacted me and said, "Hey, I got my first dog. But they all will support my post about coonhounds on Facebook. So they may never take it up, but they're not going to vote against us because they understand it. They've had experience with it. They've seen that interaction with me and dogs, with me and wildlife. They've seen me tree raccoons here and walk away and know that we're going to go out tomorrow night and perhaps tree the same raccoon. And I'm not saying we don't need to kill raccoons, because that is absolutely the wrong message. But we just have to have that realization that every time we can make an investment in somebody outside of our core group or our core supporters, we're building alliances at that point.
And that's kind of one of the things. I've had a conversation with one of our members here, probably been in the last year, and he kind of brought up to the point that, people are quick to go on, online forums. They're a great place. It's like an echo chamber. Everybody's solving all the world's problems.
Yeah.
But it's preaching to the choir, because we already have the people. If you're there, you're probably already supporting that stuff anyway. So it's like, well, great, you're educating somebody that already supports it. But
exactly,
we don't really go out to the people that either don't or don't know. And I think a lot of it is, it's comfort. We don't want to be in confrontations, especially I think that can be said for a lot of our outdoor community, outdoor sporting community, whether it be, fishing, hunting, hounds, trapping, anything, archery. We don't want to get into any sort of argument. We just don't like confrontation. We'd all sooner be out in the woods than have to deal with people. But, unfortunately, that's the opposite approach of what we need to do. We actually need to take the time to talk to these people. And, and if every one of our members of the different sporting communities out there, all the licensed hunters, trappers, houndsmen, all the folks everywhere would just reach one person per year new, imagine the impact that could have. I mean, there's 14 million deer hunters alone. You could potentially affect, or impact 14 million people there. And then, do that every year. Pretty soon, those numbers add up pretty quickly, and you have a strong base. And that's kind of where we need to be going. And,
it's one of those things that that it's easy to sit around and talk about R3 and all these programs and stuff, but it's harder to get people motivated, because I don't know if you've ever heard of Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. He's written several books on combat psychology and different things. And one of the things that he found through his extensive studies is that the fear of human confrontation is inherently higher in people than public speaking, than heights, than anything else. It's the number one fear that every one of us has instinctively, is that fear of confrontation. And I think it just comes down to an understanding of, it takes a little bit of a gut check, you know, and just getting on social media and trying to be the echo chamber. It's not hard to be confrontational on social media because you're insulated from that. But just being able to speak the truth and knowing why you do what you do. And it's not always, the best answer is not always because, you know, I live in America and this is a land of freedom and my grandpa did it and I'm going to do it and I'll become an outlaw. You know, you got to be able to talk about, educate yourself and be able to talk about the values like you have done. So I want to spend, man, the time's flown by on this, Jason. This has been awesome. I want to talk about FTA. I want to talk about, you know, what your current mission is in the 21st century. You know, what is the value of an organization like FTA in the hunting and fishing world? I really want to talk about that.
Great, because that's something I've been really thinking about a lot lately. And so, of course, the FTA, we were established in 1968. Is a separate organization. I know there's been a few iterations of different trapping organizations on the national front through the years. You know, our real mission is to promote and protect trapping and, you know, basically sustainable harvest of fur across the country. And so, you know, we work, a lot of our work is education. Probably the single biggest thing that we're known for is the Trappers College that's held each year in Northeast Indiana, Wolcottsville.
Did you know Charlie Parks?
I never met Charlie.
Charlie, but, wasn't he influential in getting that started?
He was. Him and Pat both.
I actually went through that mini course with Charlie Parks back in 1990 as a conservation officer. They made sure that we had that sort of background and just the basic knowledge of trapping. Isn't that crazy?
That's it's been around. I think it was started in 1980 and it's bounced around a little bit, but it's really found a home up there in Northeast Indiana. And, and it's so critical because you have people that come that have never set a trap to people that have been trapping for 40 plus years. And we have a vast array of instructors there that really respectful, knowing that, you have all these different people and they really are great educators. It's one thing to be a great trapper, but being able to educate people on that component is so important. And that's where one of the strengths of the college is they got some great instructors like that. So that's one of the ways that we're, working for our educational mission as well. Some new initiatives that we've really gotten into, and I mentioned briefly, about how the old guard and trapping used to be to try to just keep a low profile, but we're trying to shift gears and actually get out there. One of the things that kind of really got me here in the last year or so, and it was mainly because my wife goes to a lot of these big national meetings, and she went to the AFL meeting 2 years ago. And
you're the trophy husband.
Yeah.
You're the trophy husband that she takes to all these conventions.
Yeah. So she went to that and she came back and she said, she's like, yeah, in the directors meeting, they talked, probably for 20 minutes about trapping, and there wasn't a trapping group represented in the whole meeting. And so that was one of the things that I thought of this year. I said, we need to change that because, there's some great quotes that different people have. I think it's either Dan Gates or some other folks up there in the out west that say, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
That's right.
It's high time that we start sitting at the table. And so this past September, I ended up going up to Calgary to the AFL meeting. That was my first time ever at that meeting. And, it's not your typical meeting. You sit around and watch a bunch of presentations. It's working committee meetings. And went into the sustainable use meeting, a couple of the other ones. And there were so many people that approached me and said, we are so glad that you're here to represent trapping. And even after I got back, folks from the Upland Bird technical working group, they were contacting me, say, hey, I had a few questions, on what trappers would think about this. And, and we always say, well, we need the deer people to understand the need for trapping, and we need turkey people. We need this. And what I've really found from going to this meeting is they totally understand. It's just they've been wondering why we haven't been coming to the table.
Right.
And that's one of the big things that we've really tried to change. And, and just that going to that meeting, it opened up a lot of doors to the FTA that we previously not had opportunities with. So, just showing up, and then the director of the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources did a great article back, I think it was last spring, maybe. It was called "The World's Run by Those Who Show Up," and and it's true. If you're not showing up, then nobody knows your opinion's there. Nobody knows what that you even exist. So we really need to change that. So we've been working a lot on showing up there. Been going to the NASC Summit the last few years, and that's something we've been partnering with the National Trappers Association on, who's just a great organization, and working together is so important. If we can't work well with our own brothers, then why would anybody else want to work with us? So we've been going to that, and that's a really great meeting because that's a lot of elected legislators from around the country that attend. And you start talking to them, and you start seeing a lot of them have trapping experience. A lot of them are avid sportsmen, and they're into everything. So being able to educate them specifically on a lot of these issues and how they can help, and why it's so important. So showing up at these meetings, of course, with this, it really takes a lot more fundraising than we've traditionally done. A lot of our fundraising has been. Can I
comment on showing up real quick?
Yes.
And having that seat at the table, man, that is so important, because just like you experienced with all of these other organizations, all these other, nuances in hunting have been represented, but where have been the trappers? The same thing can be said for houndsmen. And I just want to give people an example of what can happen when you start showing up. If you don't show up to the meeting, nobody's going to come looking for you to get your opinion. It's just like, okay, they didn't show up, whatever. But if you look at, and this is for my audience, if you look at organizations like the Michigan Bear Hunters Association, UP Bear Houndsmen, Wisconsin Bear Hunters Association, Utah Houndsman Association, those organizations are being included into the conversation about wildlife management across the board, not just dealing with black bear population. Carl Chattel told me that they don't discuss upland game bird regulations in the state of Wisconsin without the Wisconsin Bear Hunters Association having a voice in that. And that's what it's going to take, not so we can intrude ourselves into it or, push our way into the conversation, but where our input is valued. Now we're part of the management plan. We're not just focusing on us. We want to be involved and preserve mussels on the Duck River, and we want to be included in that conversation. But it's not going to happen if we as a community don't start showing up and developing these organizations and demanding from our leadership, either taking leadership or demanding as a member that we are represented in these circles.
That's a great point. There is a second part to that quote that I'd looked up after I read that article from the director of Virginia, and it's the world's. So the full quote is, "The world's run by those that show up, not those waiting to be asked." And that second part of that's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
If we're not showing up, people don't know we exist.
Nobody cares.
Seek our. I mean, obviously, if somebody that's been in an agency, if somebody's not showing up like that and it could affect them, then obviously they don't care to me.
Right. Yeah.
Their voice is important, but it's showing me that they don't care enough to show up. So, and that's not the perception we need to be given to the decision makers.
Right.
And it was great when I was in Tennessee. We had a couple, Clarence and Laura Dyes, that lived not too far from me, but they showed up at every commission meeting. Mm-hmm. And every time that commission would meet, they would be there, whether it be in West Tennessee, East Tennessee, wherever. And the Tennessee Fur Harvesters Association was represented, and if they weren't at the meeting, you had commissioners saying, "Uh-oh, is everything all right with Mr. Clarence and Miss Laura?" And they were genuinely concerned because they knew these people from, coming to every meeting. And that's the kind of relationships we need to have with our commissions. We need to have with our legislators. We need to have with everybody. And, it takes some sacrifice to do so.
Sure. But by and large, all of us, I don't care if you're a trapper, a fisherman, a deer hunter, or a houndsman, really what we want is just to be left alone. We want to be able to go out and do our thing and live our own little romantic lifestyle. I mean, there's a lot of romance that goes through. I can visualize and fantasize about being Jeremiah Johnson and setting traps along, beaver traps in the Rocky Mountains. And we just want to be left alone. And I'm right there, man. You would not believe how challenging it is for me to go. Like, I'm leaving for the SCI convention tomorrow. I'll be on the floor for maybe 2.5, 3 hours, and I'll be like, I just want to go away. I just want to go be by myself and not interact. But you've got to find that energy within yourself to go out there and represent and do. If you don't go and you don't represent, man, somebody's going to represent you. Somebody's going to represent you, and it can be good or it can be bad. And when you represent yourself, it's going to be much better.
That's for sure. And it's a daunting task to go to those things. I know I've been up at the NWTF convention there in Nashville the last few years, and the Tennessee Fur Harvesters had a booth, and I was helping them. And I'm not one that likes to strike up a conversation with somebody.
I'm an introvert.
I don't like to go to parties. Growing up, even whenever I was a bachelor and I lived over in Georgia, a lot of the folks I worked with like, "Hey, what want to come out to this place tonight?" And I was like, "Nope, I'm happy at home." And
exactly,
that was me. I didn't really want to go out and do that. And so whenever I go to these events, I really have to get outside of my comfort zone. And and that's a big part too. We have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. We can do everything the way we always have. It's comfortable, put it on autopilot, but you don't really grow when you're comfortable.
Right.
And it's whenever you get outside of those zones, reach out, and I'll sit there and I'll have to, everybody that walks up, I just have to try to say something to strike up a conversation. You never know who you're going to meet.
That's exactly right.
The NWTF, especially these big meetings like NWTF or SCI, they have a lot of people that attend that are very influential, that most people, you'd see them walking around, you wouldn't know who they were.
Right.
And you never know who you're going to talk to that has connections that you can, educate them on, that they can educate that connection on, or, maybe, shoot, we see all sorts of celebrities going to some of those things sometimes. Right. And, we have a lot more supporters than most people even realize. It's just a matter of, just striking up a conversation. An interesting thing, I was at the NASC Summit here a few weeks ago, I guess early December, up in Dewey Beach, Delaware, and I just got to my room, put my stuff in there, and then they were having a social that evening, so I figured I'd go down there, and I had my FTA shirt on and hat like always, and I get in the elevator, and this guy gets in, and he's like, "Oh, Fur Takers of America." He said, "I really like trappers." And then he introduced himself. He's like, "Oh, Richard Childress." And I was like,
Oh,
all right, where are you out of? And he's like, North Carolina. And I was kind of like,
Yeah.
is this RCR racing? And yeah, it was Richard Childers, who's I think he was the chairman of the board for the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. Huge supporter of everything outdoors, and just something like that. You never know who you're going to get in an elevator with, or be at the airport with, or anything. So
yeah. And doesn't he own a race car or something?
I think so. Actually, I think his grandson's in the NASCAR right now, and just Hall of Famer, and just
Yeah.
and he's just he'll be the first one to tell you that he puts his pants on the same way as anybody else, and just real casual conversation. You'd have thought that I just met him and we've known each other or been at these meetings for years together or something. But
Right.
And that's what it really takes, and people knowing who you are, and just we always say about you need that little 3-minute elevator pitch for whatever you're going to do, and
Right.
because of those opportunities. But
100%. So where's FTA headed? I mean, how are you guys dealing with, you talked about the education part, but being the president of that organization, Jason, I mean, how do you keep the wheels on the bus when we've got things going in Washington where they're trying to outlaw ban fur sales, and they've got the city ordinances in Denver. And I mean, it just seems like in a world that looks like we're collapsing around us, we've got to have leaders that step up and keep the wheels on the bus here. So how's that going?
So the legislation stuff, that's of course the hot time of the year now with the new legislative session. The Washington fur ban, actually, I was alerted to it last week. Charles Whitwam from Howl for Wildlife actually called me, and I was at a meeting in Tennessee doing some stuff, and he asked me my thoughts on it, and I looked it over and sent him some talking points. Howl for Wildlife, by the way, just to put a plug in for them, if y'all aren't a member or or at least signed up with their action page, I strongly encourage it. It's probably in 25 years of working in the wildlife field, it's probably the most effective platform that I've ever seen for getting information out, educating folks, getting letters out to legislators. I mean, it is just a phenomenal platform they have. So I really want to put a plug in and encourage everybody to join, because, one of the things that it does is make use of the
Technology.
masses.
Yeah.
Technology in the masses. And it makes it where, we had one of the bills that came up, one of these fur ban bills, those have been the flavor of the week for the last 2 years that I've really seen. California it passed, and then they figured, well, we're going to try everywhere else. So the District of Columbia, they had introduced one 2 years ago, and it came out of nowhere kind of late in the year, and they were considering it. And that was the first time that we got involved with Howl. Charles had actually asked our business executive about it, and Dave Hastings, who was the president then, said, "What do you think about this?" And I said, "Well, I think it's worth a try." And and to tell you how effective it is, and this was our first real experience with these fur bans. We got in there. I found out exactly how the platform works, worked up some content, and sent it, and they wanted to outlaw any fur sales whatsoever, whether it be garments, fishing lures wasn't exempted in there. So, I mean, it had much larger impacts than what anybody, I think, was even aware of. And so we put out this content, sent it to Charles. He had it up on their website. And when it was all said and done with, there was over, I think it was like 3,400 people had signed on and sent letters. And the cool thing, it's not this typical form letter that a lot of organizations have. You just put your name on. It's mixed and matched. I don't know if they're using artificial intelligence or what to come up, but it's not the same thing. Because what happens when a legislator or anybody gets those kind of form letters, it all gets compiled and everybody says, okay, we got 50 of these that said this exact thing. Well, this one, it's all individual responses that's getting sent to these folks. And in all, it was over 54,000 emails were sent to the D.C. City Council.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was meaningful to them. And what really got me even more than anything, some of the content I put in there was talking about faux fur and how it's synthetic materials, microplastics, all that good stuff. And the one councilman who was actually leading the hearing specifically started asking questions that were put in these letters. And he started asking them to the groups that were supporting this bill, that were sponsoring it. And whenever they couldn't answer it or couldn't give a good, clear answer, they knew, said, okay, there's more to this than we thought. So
right.
The next state that really took that over was Hawaii. And it's like, well, why do we need fur in Hawaii? It's sunny and hot and vacation. Everybody wearing bikinis and swim trunks and
lays and luau's and all that sort of stuff. Surfing,
yep, and,
looking at volcanoes.
That's our image, yeah. So, I got on there, and there was only 3 people that showed up to oppose that bill. And one was Chalice Hobbs from the International Fur Federation, I believe. Another young lady from up in New York who's a furrier. She has been a bulldog on all this stuff and just really, really going to every one of them, Washington, Hawaii, Rhode Island, all the different states, and then myself. And we got on there. We kind of, tried to educate the folks, really went through the justification of the bill, which, is emotional, and most of it's just downright lies.
Right.
Yeah, they really are riding the COVID stuff for everything it can. There's only been 4 cases of COVID being transmitted to humans from mink in the United States. And the CDC actually has guidance out there to keep that at a minimum. So once the Hawaii legislature, the committee, heard that, the first thing they said is, well, it sounds like this whole justification is, based on false information. So we need to strike this from the bill. And the next question was, if we don't have a good justification, how can we have a bill? So it kind of died in committee.
Right.
We got advanced. So that was a great case of the information and the facts getting out there. And so the fur ban bills are the big thing. I haven't really seen too much legislation otherwise. There's always the every year on the federal level, there's the refuge bill, refuge from cruel trapping or something that there's a couple legislators that have introduced into Congress, and that would ban all the use of traps on national wildlife refuges. And that's always been in the background, but there's never really been a whole lot of movement. Considering all the major issues going on across the country that the legislators need to be worrying about, that seems to be probably something that shouldn't even, be considered. But
right.
But so doing a lot with that stuff. So yeah, we're doing a lot with the legislature. On those different issues. We work really closely with Howl because of their platform being so successful. And Charles is just, he is the one that always comes to me and says, "Hey, have you heard about this bill?" So I just can't say enough about them. How critically important they are to all conservation groups.
Don't you guys have a relationship with Sportsmen's Alliance as well? And I agree with you. Hal's doing a great job. Charles, very aggressive. I had a conversation with him last week, and we've been working on the whole Colorado thing, not closely, but we're in some of the same meetings and things like that. But so you can go to Hal and you can sign up for it doesn't cost you a thing to get on their new email list. Same thing can be said for Sportsman's Alliance. You can go to the Sportsman's Alliance website, start getting an email drop from them every week. I get a few emails from them a week, but they send their newsletter. It's completely free. So, and they've actually got lobbyists and representation in Washington, D.C. They've got boots on the ground there that's tracking these sort of issues. Everything from endangered species litigation to they've filed suit against the federal government over the Great Lakes wolf population. So, there's a lot of different organizations that we can get involved with out there, and a lot of good people doing good work.
Sportsmen's Alliance, they're just, they've done an outstanding job for so long. And one of the biggest things we've been supporting with them the last few years, we've been actually donating to the program, is their it's the Conservation Adventures program, which is an educational program that they've introduced into several state educational curriculums.
Public schools.
I think Tennessee was one of the last one in the last year or so. I think Ohio, maybe Pennsylvania, and I think Iowa's the other school or the other state. And that is so critically important because it's going to give that education to the to our young people that are going to be the future decision makers. And,
Yep.
Well, I'm sure from doing school programs through the years that, man, kids are awesome, what they understand and what they comprehend. And, I did one about 10 or 15 years ago. I went into this, it was an elementary school up in Northwest Georgia, not far from where I live now in Alabama, but started asking some questions that I never really knew anything about until I was in high school. It was actually my high school environmental science class. And these kids that were in 3rd and 4th grade were answering questions that I was just learning about when I was in high school. And it's just amazing how these kids are nowadays. But, and it's great whenever they learn stuff, they can take it home and educate their parents on a lot of it because their parents just aren't knowledgeable. And,
Right.
and that's one of the ways that we're going to really make some impacts. And I just can't say enough about that Conservation Adventures program with Sportsman's Alliance because it's just really well thought out, great curriculum,
Right.
and a lot of people are starting to get on board with it. So
Yeah, I've told Brian Lynn it needs a segment in there on hound hunting, though.
yeah, well, you know what? I think they need to.
But when you're not at
revise-
the table, when you don't,
That's exactly it.
we weren't involved in when that curriculum was developed. No hound organization was. So guess what got left out? And so, but yeah, Jason, I know we could go on it. This has been such a great conversation and an easy, I don't even know how long, I don't keep track of how long we go on these things, but, how can people find out more information about Fur Takers of America? Find out, do you guys do publications, websites, social media? Give us all the information.
Oh, sure. So our website is furtakersamerica.com, and that can kind of give you the access to joining. We do have a monthly magazine that's published. We're, I think, the only group that still has a monthly issue. And that's something a lot of people don't realize how much the cost of paper and printing and postage has gone up.
Yeah.
That has really been cost prohibitive for a lot of organizations. And that's something we still maintain that 12-month subscription as membership. You can visit us on Facebook. We have our Fur Takers of America Facebook page. We're on Instagram, and we actually have a YouTube page, but there's not a whole lot on there. So something that I've been specifically working on, especially yesterday when I was out trapping, and this goes into some of those sacrifices we have to make. I could have got a lot more sets in yesterday, but over last week I
It's
bought
a
myself
pain in the butt.
tripod. Yeah, it is, and I bought a tripod, and so I could put my camera up there. And as I was making sets and different things, situations, I started filming it. And we need to really increase our content on the social media. And I think once people start seeing a lot of that, and it's really something that we've talked about within the organization is, if somebody wants to learn how to do anything nowadays, you go to YouTube. You can figure, if you want to fix your car to, build your own solar panels. Probably
we were working on the coffee maker on Monday night, just based on Monday night based on YouTube videos.
Yep.
Tearing a coffee maker apart, which finally ended up going in the dumpster. But
if we can generate some content there, and then everybody goes to whatever site to learn how to trap, they all have their favorites, and it's like, well, they should be coming to us to learn. So we're trying to increase our content there, and a lot of it, if people out there have any content whatsoever, certainly let our folks know at the business office, and we'd be glad to help out, maybe use some of it, anything we can do to get information and education out there.
Right.
And of course, with a lot of our initiatives we have going on right now, we're getting out of the comfort zone, and it's costing more money. And just like I said, the cost of publication alone has really become very high. And so we're trying to do some new fundraisers. And one of the biggest ones we've ever done now is our Sportsman's Calendar that started, I guess, in the middle of the summer last year. We started selling them, but it's basically there's a prize for all 366 days of 2024, $30 donation. And the cool thing is if you buy it today, if your number was drawn on January 1st, you still win. So It's a really cool program, has a chance to raise a lot of money for us and really fund a lot of these new initiatives, like going to the meetings to show up and doing some of the educational stuff and offering more scholarships and stuff like that. So,
man, that's all good stuff. I'm so happy to hear. I'm not going to lie, man. I've kind of lost track of Fur Takers of America and different things like that over the years. And, just building relationships through guys like Charlie Mishak at Who's Your Outdoor or Who's Your Trapper Supply, kind of got me thinking more about that. And I'll close this podcast out by making this little statement here. But, we don't have to agree on everything. When I go to the family reunion or when I go to a family Christmas or Thanksgiving, I don't agree with everything everybody does around the table. I don't even approve of everything they do around the table. But if a stranger walked in the door and started trying to hurt somebody at that table, then I would jump up because that's family. And in the outdoor community, we've got to realize that we're all in this thing together, and there is no other family out there that's going to show up and support us than this outdoor community, whether it's an elk hunter, a deer hunter, a trapper, a fisherman, a houndsman. We've got to figure out ways where we find the common ground to come together on these issues and not continually eat our own and shoot holes in the boat for the sake of the fact that, they've got traps set down this creek and I can't run my coonhound there. We got to figure that out. And I'm 100% convinced that if we don't come together, then it's all going to be taken away. But it's a lot easier to find the common ground than figuring out how we're going to survive in a future that doesn't include our own individual passions.
That's exactly right. That's, it's a good way to look at it is, something that I've thought about many times is, we're all sportsmen. And that should be the first thing that we acknowledge ourselves as. And I just happen to be a sportsman that hunts, deer hunts, turkey hunts, traps, fishes. I don't know. Sometimes I go hunt mushrooms, different stuff like that, right. Which, that's all part of our lifestyle. Most of us are, you really look at it and it's, there's a lot of hunters, gatherers, and everything else that goes on. And people of the land, I think, as Dave Hastings always really said well. So that's, how we need to think of ourselves, and then know that we all have each other's backs, because whenever it comes down to it, nobody else does. So, and, every one of us has a different, something else is every one of us has a different gift that we've been given in life. Experience here, I think it's funny that mine's working with endangered species. So I have a good understanding of that.
Right.
And, we have such a diverse group in the hunting and fishing and just the outdoor sporting community of doctors, lawyers, attorneys, everything and anything in between. And, we all come together as, that common bond. So, we really need to think about each other and support each other any chance we get.
Yeah, for sure. John Maxwell, great leadership teacher and things he's talked about. I mentioned that we all just want to be left alone, but John Maxwell claims that even the most introverted person will still have contact with between 10 and 25,000 people in their lifetime. And so at that particular moment, you're standing in the line at Walmart, you've got your camouflage sweatshirt on, you have no intention of talking about hunting to anybody or trapping to anybody anywhere, and somebody's going to ask you a question, and you've got to be prepared at that moment to be able to represent who you are. So every one of us is called to be a leader at some point, at some phase. You may never be the president of FDA. You may never, be the president of your local hound club. But at some point, you're going to be called to be the leader for your lifestyle at that particular moment in time. And it would be a pity if that time finds you unprepared to do so. So I appreciate everybody. I appreciate you coming on, Jason. We're going to do this again. We need to get together and I wanted to talk about my first fox trap and my dad hauling me down a lane to check a coon trap when I caught my first coon and all that stuff. But we'll get together and we'll do that. But thanks for taking the time to showcase FTA and represent trappers and help us build these bridges and bridge these gaps in this outdoor community. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me. I had a lot of fun.
I appreciate it. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of the Houndsman XP podcast. Make sure you check out FTA, Fur Takers of America, on their websites or socials. They're not hard to find. See what they're into, see where you can support them. And make sure you're supporting the Houndsman XP podcast. When we sell stuff so that we can do this show, we don't do this show so that we can sell stuff. And I've been trying to figure out how to get that message out to all of you. When you buy a Join or Die sweatshirt from our website, you're gonna help keep this show on the air. But we're also making donations right now to Initiative 91 in Colorado to protect and promote lion hunting in the state of Colorado. We're trying to keep wildlife management science-based, not emotional-based. It's responsible. And what a great way to do it, having guys like Jason on the podcast, who's a wildlife biologist, understands the science, and he's out there doing good work. So thanks for tuning in. Make sure you check us out on houndsmenxp.com. And until next time, this is Fair Chase.